Ambassador HFY War had spent 40 years studying humans. He had watched them laugh at funerals and cry at weddings. He had seen them run into burning buildings to save strangers and start wars over pieces of colored cloth. In all his years of diplomatic service aboard the Nexus, the great capital station of the Galactic Concord, he had never once claimed to fully understand them. But he understood one thing about them very well. When humans were loud, the galaxy was safe. When humans went quiet, something terrible was about to happen. And today, the humans were very, very quiet. The summit had been called to settle a simple matter. 200 species had gathered in the great circular chamber of the Nexus to discuss mining rights in the Orion Vale, a stretch of space rich in rare metals that sat near the edge of human territory. Everyone expected the human delegation to arrive with their usual energy, loud voices, firm handshakes, and that strange dark drink they carried everywhere. Admiral Priya Marin, the head of the human diplomatic mission, was known for being sharp, funny, and impossible to push around. Tynel had prepared his arguments carefully. But when the session opened, the human seats were empty. Tynel noticed it immediately. He sat up straighter in his chair and looked around the chamber. A few other ambassadors had noticed too. The Solari delegate leaned over and whispered something to her aide. The Torvan general, Drekt Ma, narrowed his deep-set eyes at the empty row of chairs. The session chairman, a tall insectoid from the Vreth Collective, cleared his throat and announced a short delay. Perhaps the human delegation was simply late. It happened. Not often with humans, but it happened. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. Tynel opened his personal console and checked the human diplomatic channel, the open frequency every species used to communicate with Earth's representatives. The channel was active, broadcasting. But when he sent a message, there was no reply. He sent another, nothing. He tried a direct call to Admiral Marin's personal line. It rang and rang and rang, and no one picked up. A cold feeling settled in the pit of his stomach. Around the chamber, the mood was shifting. What had started as mild confusion was becoming something else. Ambassadors were whispering to each other. Aides were tapping furiously at their consoles. The Vreth chairman called for order 3 times, but no one was listening. Tynel caught General Drekt Mo's eye across the room. The old Torvan warrior did not look confused. He looked worried. And in Tynel's experience, a worried Torvan was a very bad sign. After 2 hours, the session was formally suspended. Tynel walked quickly through the crowded corridors of the Nexus, past groups of diplomats arguing in a dozen different languages. He reached his private office and immediately contacted the Keth Intelligence Bureau back on his homeworld. His handler, a young analyst named Bethan, answered on the first call. "I need everything you have on the human delegation," Tynel said. "They did not attend the summit. They are not answering any communications." Bethan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ambassador, we were about to contact you. It is not just the delegation." "What do you mean?" "Every human ship in the galaxy has gone dark. Every colony, every outpost, every military station, all of them, at the same time. Approximately 3 hours ago, every human vessel in known space either stopped transmitting or changed course toward human territory. Their civilian transports, their cargo ships, their military patrols, all of them. They pulled back everything." Tynel felt the cold in his stomach spread to his chest. "All of them? That is not possible. There are millions of human ships spread across the galaxy." "We are aware of that, sir. That is what makes this so concerning. The level of coordination required to recall every asset simultaneously it should not be possible. But it happened, and there was no warning, no announcement, no emergency broadcast. They just stopped talking and started moving. Tynell leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. In all his years of service, through border disputes and trade wars, and the occasional military standoff, he had never seen anything like this. Species recalled their fleets when they were preparing for war. They recalled their civilians when they expected to be attacked. But no species had ever recalled everything at once without saying a single word about why. "What about their civilians on alien worlds?" he asked. "Leaving," Bethan said. "Our agents on Solari Prime report that the human residents in the trade quarter began packing their belongings approximately 4 hours ago. They boarded transport ships that arrived without any scheduled flight plans. When asked where they were going, they said nothing. Our agents noted that they did not appear frightened. They appeared focused." That word hit Tynell like a punch. Not frightened, focused. Humans were many things. Emotional, unpredictable, sometimes reckless. But when they became focused, when every trace of humor and warmth drained from their faces, and they moved with cold, quiet purpose, that was when the galaxy should pay attention. He thought back to the last major conflict humanity had been involved in, the Kessler incident, 30 years ago, when a rogue Torvan fleet had destroyed a human colony on the border. The galaxy had expected negotiations, angry speeches, demands for reparation. Instead, humanity had gone quiet for 72 hours. And then, without any declaration of war, they had appeared in Torvan space with a fleet so large it blocked out the stars and dismantled every military installation within 3 star systems in a single afternoon. The Torvan had surrendered within a week. General Drekt Mo had been a young officer during that war. He still walked with a limp from the injuries he had received. And despite everything, he spoke of humans with something close to reverence. Tynell stood up and walked to the wide window of his office. Outside, the Nexus hung in the glow of a distant nebula, surrounded by the ships of 100 species. Everything looked peaceful. Everything looked normal. But somewhere out there, beyond the borders of known space, humanity was moving in silence. And Tynell knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime watching them, that whatever had made the humans pull back everything they had, it was not politics. It was not trade. It was not any petty squabble between species. It was something that scared them. And if something scared the humans, then the rest of the galaxy should be terrified. He reached for his console and began composing a message to the Kiev government. His hands were steady, but his hearts, both of them, were beating very fast. The message was simple. The humans have gone silent. Prepare for anything. Outside the window, the stars burned on, indifferent and cold. And in the vast darkness between them, the silence grew. 48 hours had passed since the humans went silent, and the galactic concord was quietly falling apart. On the surface, everything still functioned. The Nexus station hummed with activity. Diplomats attended meetings. Trade ships docked and departed. The news channels reported on local politics and celebrity gossip. But underneath it all, in the private rooms and encrypted channels where the real business of the galaxy happened, fear was spreading like poison in water. High Arbitress Selenith had governed the Concord for over 300 years. She had seen empires rise and crumble. She had brokered peace between species that had been killing each other for centuries. She was old, patient, and very difficult to frighten. But as she sat at the head of the emergency council table, surrounded by the intelligence chiefs of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt afraid. "Give me your reports," she said. Her voice was calm. It was always calm. That was what made her dangerous. The Solari intelligence chief spoke first. She was a thin, silver-skinned woman with 4 eyes that never blinked. "Our agents across 12 sectors confirm the same pattern. Every human national on foreign soil has departed. They left in an organized manner, taking personal belongings but abandoning all business interests, property, and ongoing contracts. They gave no explanation. When pressed, they said only that they had been called home. Called by whom? Selenith asked. We do not know. There was no public announcement, no emergency broadcast on any human channel. Whatever order was given, it was sent through channels we cannot access. The Ven Hegemony's chief, a stocky reptilian with scarred scales, leaned forward. Perhaps this is internal. A civil war. A political crisis. Humans are known for fighting among themselves. Before Selenith could respond, a deep voice cut through the room. General Drekt Mo sat at the far end of the table, his massive frame making the chair look like it was built for a child. He had been invited as a military advisor, and until now, he had said nothing. That theory is wrong, Drekt said flatly. The Ven chief bristled. And how would you know, General? Drekt looked at him with eyes that had seen more battlefields than most species had planets. Because I have fought humans, I have bled because of humans, and I have spent 30 years studying how they think, how they move, how they fight. When humans fight each other, they are loud, they argue, they protest, they wave signs and shout in the streets. It is messy and emotional, and very, very public. He paused. This is none of those things. This is quiet. Every ship, every person, every signal, pulled back at the same time, without a single word. Humans do not do this for internal problems. They do this when they have detected a threat so serious that they have decided the rest of us should not even know about it. The room went still. They are not hiding from each other, Drekt continued. They are hiding from something else. And when humans hide, it is not because they are afraid. It is because they are getting ready. And they do not want us in the way when they begin. Selenith studied the old general's face. You believe they are protecting us? I believe, Drekt said slowly, that humans have a very annoying habit of deciding what is best for everyone else without asking permission. And I believe that whatever they are preparing for, it is something they think we cannot handle. The room erupted into argument. Some chiefs dismissed Drekt's theory as paranoid military thinking. Others agreed with him. The Vreth representative demanded that the Concord send a fleet to force open human borders and demand answers. The Solari chief warned that any military approach to human space would be seen as an act of war. The argument went back and forth, growing louder and more heated, until Selenith raised one hand, and the room fell silent. We will not invade human space, she said. Not yet, but we will watch, and we will prepare. Far from the Nexus, in a lonely stretch of space near the galactic rim, Captain Resha Vey was having a very bad week. Resha was a Solari merchant captain. She ran a small cargo ship called the Drifting Moon, and she made her living hauling goods between the outer colonies. She was not political. She did not care about summits or intelligence reports or the grand games of empires. She cared about getting paid and keeping her ship in one piece. But 3 days ago, she had dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a set of coordinates where she was supposed to pick up a shipment of medical supplies from a human research station. And when she arrived, the station was dark. It hung in space like a dead thing. No lights, no signals, no energy readings. The docking bay was open and empty. Every ship that had been stationed there was gone. Resha was not a brave woman. She knew that about herself, and she was fine with it. But the medical supplies were worth a lot of money, and her fuel was low, and the station might have supplies she could use. So she docked. The station was abandoned. Every personal item was gone. Every computer had been wiped clean. The hallways were dark, except for the emergency lights, which cast everything in a dull red glow. Risha walked through empty rooms and stripped laboratories, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found nothing useful until she reached the communications room. The main console was dead, but a backup terminal in the corner still had power. She sat down and searched through the system. Almost everything had been deleted, but deep in the corrupted remains of the station's log files, she found one entry that had survived. It was a short audio recording, time-stamped 3 days ago. She played it. The recording was broken and full of static. She could barely make out the voice. A woman, speaking quickly, with a tone that was not quite panic, but something close to it. Most of the words were lost in the noise, but 3 words came through clearly, repeated over and over, like a warning or a prayer. It answered back. Risha played it again, and again. Each time, the same 3 words, cut through the static like a knife. It answered back. She did not know what it meant. She did not know what it was, or what answering back could possibly refer to. But something about the way the woman said those words, the way her voice cracked on the last syllable, made Risha's blood run cold. She copied the file to her personal drive, powered down the terminal, and walked as fast as she could back to her ship. She undocked from the dead station and jumped to faster-than-light speed without looking back. As the stars stretched into lines around her, she played the recording one more time. The woman's voice filled the small cockpit of the drifting moon. Broken and desperate and afraid. It answered back. It answered back. It answered back. Risha turned off the recording and flew in silence. Behind her, the abandoned station drifted alone in the dark, keeping its secrets. And somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the galaxy, something ancient and vast was moving closer. Back on the Nexus, Selenith stood alone in her private chamber, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy. A new report had just arrived from the border worlds, the outer colonies that sat at the very edge of explored space. Their long-range sensors had detected something massive, something moving through the empty void between galaxies, heading straight for the Milky Way. The readings made no sense. The object, if it was an object, was larger than any ship ever built, larger than any station, larger than some moons, and it was moving at a speed that should have been impossible. Selenith stared at the readings for a long time. Then she looked at the dark patch on the map where human space used to glow with activity. She thought about Drek's words. She thought about the silence. She thought about an entire species pulling back behind its borders and going dark, like an animal retreating to its den before a storm. "What did you find out there?" she whispered to the empty room. "What is coming?" The map had no answer. The humans had no answer. And the silence continued to grow. 1 week after the silence began, the galaxy could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The news had leaked. Despite the Concorde's best efforts to keep things quiet, the story had spread across every network and every world. Humanity had gone dark. All of them. No one knew why, and something unknown had been detected moving toward the galaxy from the outside. Panic had not yet taken hold, but it was close. On 100 different worlds, people stocked supplies and whispered rumors. Some said the humans had been destroyed by an unknown weapon. Others said they had abandoned the galaxy entirely, fleeing to some hidden colony in another dimension. The most popular theory on the news channels was that it was all a political trick, that the humans were staging a dramatic exit to gain more power in the Concorde. None of these theories made Selenith feel better. A Concorde reconnaissance fleet, 42 warships from 12 different species, would approach the Sol system and attempt to make contact with humanity. It was a diplomatic mission, but every ship carried weapons, just in case. Ambassador Tynel Vor requested a place on the fleet. He did not know why. He told himself it was professional curiosity, a diplomat's need to see things with his own eyes. But deep down, he knew it was something else. It was the same feeling that made people slow down to look at disasters. He needed to see what the humans had done. General Drekt Mo commanded the fleet from the bridge of a Torvan dreadnought. He had argued against the mission privately, telling Selenith that poking at human borders during a time like this was like kicking a sleeping predator. She had overruled him. So he went, because that was his duty. And he brought the biggest ship he had, because he was not stupid. The fleet traveled in formation for 3 days, as they crossed into the region of space that bordered human territory. The first thing they noticed was the absence of traffic. Normally, this stretch of space was busy with merchant ships, passenger transports, and patrol vessels. Now, it was empty. Not a single ship, not a single signal, just the stars and the cold. On the morning of the 4th day, they reached the outer boundary of human space, and they stopped. Tynel was standing on the observation deck of the Torvin dreadnought when he saw it. At first, his mind refused to process what his eyes were showing him. He blinked. He adjusted the magnification on the viewport. He checked the sensor readings 3 times. It was a wall. Not a physical wall, not metal or stone or energy shields. It was made of ships. Thousands of them. Human warships of every size and class, arranged in a perfect curved formation that stretched in every direction as far as the sensors could reach. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, dreadnoughts, all of them sitting in space with their engines at idle and their weapons powered down. Silent, still, waiting. The sensor officer on the bridge ran the numbers and reported them in a shaking voice. The formation was spherical. It wrapped around the entire boundary of human space. Every border, every approach route, every possible entry point. The estimated number of ships was somewhere north of 14,000. Tynel felt his legs go weak. 14,000 warships. The entire Concord Navy, combining every fleet from every species, numbered about 20,000. And the humans had placed 14,000 ships in a single defensive ring, like a fence around a garden. Drecht stood at the center of the bridge, with his arms crossed, staring at the display. If anything, he looked like a man who had just had his worst fear confirmed. "Hail them," he ordered. The communications officer sent a message on every standard frequency. The message was polite, formal, and clear. The Concord fleet was here on a peaceful mission. They requested communication with human leadership. They meant no harm. No response. They tried again, and again. They used every language in the Concord database. They used emergency frequencies, military frequencies, civilian frequencies. They broadcast mathematical patterns and universal peace signals. They even played human music, because someone on the crew had heard that humans responded well to their own cultural signals. Nothing. The wall of ships sat in perfect silence, like statues carved from metal and light. Hours passed. The fleet waited. Some captains in the formation began arguing that they should push forward, force their way through the line and demand answers. Drecht shut that idea down with a single sentence. Anyone who crosses that line without permission will not be coming back. Then, just as the debate was reaching its peak, something changed. One ship broke away from the human formation. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle. A corvette class, lightly armed, moving at a slow and deliberate speed. It crossed the empty space between the wall and the Concord fleet in complete silence, came to a stop exactly 1 kilometer from Drecht's dreadnought, and transmitted a single data packet. Then it turned around and flew back to its place in the wall without a word. The data packet was received by every ship in the fleet simultaneously. Tynel opened it on his personal console with hands that trembled slightly. It contained one file, a star chart. The chart showed the Milky Way galaxy from the outside, like a photograph taken from a great distance. And there in the dark space between galaxies, a path was marked in red. Something was moving along that path. Something large enough that the chart had to zoom out twice to show its full scale. It was heading directly for the galaxy, and according to the timestamps on the chart, it had been moving for a very long time. Next to the path, in simple text translated into every language of the Concord, was a single annotation. "We are handling it. Stay behind the line. Tynell read those words 5 times. Each time, they hit him harder than the last. We are handling it. As if whatever was coming, whatever that enormous red mark on the chart represented, was a minor problem. A chore. Something the humans had taken upon themselves to deal with, like a neighbor clearing a fallen tree from the road. Stay behind the line. Not a request, not a plea, an instruction, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had already decided how this would end. Drecht read the message and was silent for a long time. Then he said very quietly, to no one in particular, "They knew. They have known for years, and they told no one, because they knew we would panic. And they were right." Tynell left the bridge and went to his quarters. He sat down at his desk and began searching through every classified archive he could access. Old records, pre-Concord files, intelligence reports from the early days of human contact. He did not know what he was looking for, but he knew it was there. He found it buried in a file that was over a century old, a Keth intelligence report from the early days of humanity's expansion into space. The analyst who had written it had flagged something unusual. Humanity's rate of military development was far beyond what their economic or territorial needs required. They were building warships faster than they could crew them. They were developing weapons that had no logical application against any known species. They were expanding into empty, resource-poor sectors of space for no apparent strategic reason. The analyst had concluded that humanity was either dangerously paranoid or preparing for a conflict that no one else could see. The report had been filed and forgotten. But now, reading it in the dim light of his quarters, with a star chart showing an impossible threat heading for the galaxy, Tynell understood. Humanity's expansion had never been about ambition. Their obsession with military power had never been about conquest. Their relentless drive to build and grow and push into every corner of the galaxy had never been about greed. All of it, every ship, every weapon, every colony in a strategically useless corner of space, it was all part of a plan that had been running for over 100 years. Tynell thought about Admiral Marin sitting in the Concord chamber, laughing at bad jokes and drinking her dark coffee and arguing about mining rights. He thought about all the human diplomats he had known over the years, warm, loud, full of love. And all that time, behind the smiles and the handshakes, they had been carrying this secret, this terrible, heavy secret. They had known something was coming. And instead of telling the galaxy, instead of sharing the burden, they had shouldered it alone. They had joined the Concord, made friends, built alliances, and all the while, they had been quietly preparing to stand between the galaxy and whatever was out there in the dark. They were not joining our civilization, Tynell whispered to himself. They were positioning themselves between us and the end of everything. He closed the file and sat in silence. Outside his window, the human wall stretched across the stars. 14,000 ships standing guard over a galaxy that had never even known it needed guarding. 2 weeks into the silence, the galaxy learned what fear truly meant. The Concord's deep space sensor arrays, massive installations built on the outer rim of the galaxy to watch the empty void beyond, had been recalibrated and pointed in the direction the human star chart had indicated. What they found broke every model, every theory, and every assumption about what was possible in the universe. It was not a ship. It was not a fleet. It was not any kind of machine that any species had ever imagined. The sensor data described something alive, a structure of impossible scale that moved through the void between galaxies the way a whale moved through deep ocean. It consumed energy as it traveled, not fuel, not power cells, stars. The few dim stars that drifted in the intergalactic void were going dark in its path, drained of their light and heat in a matter of hours. The scientists called it the arrival. They gave it a name because they could not describe it. Its shape changed constantly. Its size was estimated at roughly twice the diameter of a small moon, but the readings fluctuated wildly. It radiated energy on wavelengths that had never been recorded before, and it was heading directly for the Milky Way at a speed that should have torn apart the fabric of space itself. When the data was presented to the Emergency Council, 3 species representatives left the room without speaking. 2 others began praying. The Vreth delegate, normally the calmest voice in any room, stared at the holographic image of the arrival and said simply, "We are all going to die." Selenith did not allow herself the luxury of despair. She immediately ordered a galaxy-wide alert and began coordinating a defensive response. But the reality was grim. The Concorde had no weapon that could operate on this scale. Their combined fleets, even if they could be assembled in time, would be like insects attacking a mountain. Across the galaxy, the panic that had been simmering for 2 weeks finally boiled over. Worlds began hoarding resources. Trade routes collapsed. 3 smaller civilizations announced they were abandoning their homeworlds and fleeing to the far side of the galaxy. The Ven hegemony sealed its borders. The Solari markets crashed. The Torvan quietly moved their breeding colonies to hidden systems, preparing for the worst. And through all of it, humanity said nothing. Selenith could not accept the silence any longer. She did something no High Arbitress had done in the history of the Concorde. She made a public broadcast, not to the Council, not to the intelligence chiefs, but to everyone. Every species, every world, every ship with a receiver. And she directed it at the dark patch of space where humanity sat behind its wall of ships. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could hear the strain beneath it. To the people of Earth and the human colonies, this is High Arbitress Selenith of the Galactic Concorde. We have seen the star chart you provided. We have confirmed the existence of the entity you call the Arrival. We understand now why you withdrew, and we understand what you are preparing to do. I speak now not as the leader of the Concorde, but as one living being to another. We are afraid. We need your guidance. We need to know what you know. Please, answer us. The broadcast went out across every frequency. It reached every corner of the galaxy. And then there was silence. The same terrible, endless silence that had defined the last 2 weeks. 6 hours passed. Tyanel sat in his quarters on the Torvan dreadnought, still parked near the human wall. He had stopped eating. He had stopped sleeping properly. He spent his hours staring at the human ships and waiting for something, anything, to change. Then, without warning, every communication device in the galaxy activated at once. It was not a response to Selenith's message. It was something far larger. Every screen, every speaker, every transmitter in every ship and station and colony across the Milky Way was suddenly carrying the same signal. Humanity had overridden every frequency simultaneously, a feat of technical power that should not have been possible. The signal lasted exactly 30 seconds. It was a woman's voice, calm, clear, steady as stone. To the Galactic Concorde and all the living species of the Milky Way, this is Admiral Priya Marin, speaking on behalf of the United Human Command. We are aware of the approaching entity. We have been aware for 137 years. In approximately 72 hours, we will engage. You will detect significant energy discharges in the intergalactic void. Do not be alarmed. Do not intervene. We did not ask for this duty, but we will not abandon it. When this is over, we will return to our seats at the Concorde, and we expect the coffee to still be hot. Marin out. The signal ended. Every screen went back to normal, and for a long, stretched moment, the entire galaxy held its breath. Tyanel realized he was standing. He did not remember getting up. His hands were pressed flat against the viewport, and he was staring at the human wall of ships. Something was changing. The formation was shifting. Ships were moving, not randomly, not in disorder, but with the smooth, practiced grace of a machine that had rehearsed this 1,000 times. The wall was opening, and from behind it, from the depths of human space, the fleet emerged. He had attended Concord military reviews, where thousands of ships flew in formation. He had watched recordings of the great wars of the past. He thought he understood what military power looked like on a galactic scale. He was wrong. The ships that poured through the gap in the wall were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. There were warships of familiar design, destroyers, cruisers, carriers, but there were also things that had no name. Massive constructs, each one the size of a small city, bristling with weapon systems that the Concorde sensors could not even identify. Ships built in shapes that made no tactical sense, until you realized they were designed to fight something much, much larger than another ship. Vessels covered in armor so thick that they registered on sensors as solid objects, rather than hollow ships. And they kept coming, wave after wave after wave. For hours, the fleet poured out of human space in an endless river of metal and light. The Concorde fleet watched in stunned silence as humanity revealed what it had been building in secret for over a century. Captain HFY was far from the wall, parked in a quiet sector near the rim when the fleet passed through her area. She stood at the viewport of her little cargo ship and watched the human ships fly past in formation. She tried to count them. She counted for 4 hours straight, marking each one on her console. She lost count after 10,000. Her co-pilot, a young Solari named Tav, stood beside her with tears running down his face. He was not crying from fear. He was crying because he had never seen anything so terrifying and so beautiful at the same time. "How long?" Tav whispered. "How long have they been building all of this?" Risha could not answer. She watched a construct the size of a mountain drift past her viewport, its surface covered in glowing weapon arrays that pulsed with a cold blue light. Behind it came a formation of carriers, each one launching smaller attack ships that swarmed around the larger vessels like birds around a whale. Behind them came ships she could not even describe, dark, angular things that seemed to bend the light around them. On the bridge of the Torvan dreadnought, General Drekt Mo watched the human fleet move toward the edge of the galaxy. His sensor officer reported the count every few minutes, and each time the number was higher. 15,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. "That is more ships than the entire Concorde Navy," the sensor officer said, and his voice cracked. Drekt nodded slowly. "They were never part of our Navy. They were never part of our alliance. Not really. They stood beside us and smiled, and traded, and made friends, and the whole time, they were building an army to fight something we did not even know existed." The last human ships passed through the wall, and the formation closed behind them. The fleet stretched out toward the void in a spear of light and metal that was visible on sensors from across the galaxy. 72 hours. That was what Marin had said. In 72 hours, humanity would meet the arrival in the dark between galaxies and fight for the survival of every living thing in the Milky Way. Tynel pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the viewport and closed his eyes. He thought about Marin's voice, that impossibly steady voice, making a joke about coffee while announcing that she was about to lead her species into a battle against something that ate stars. That was the thing about humans that he had never been able to explain to his own people. It was not their weapons or their ships or their numbers. It was that they could look into the face of the impossible, the unthinkable, the certain end of everything, and they could still make a joke. They could still be human. And then the first flash came. Far away, at the very edge of what the sensors could detect, a burst of light so bright that it registered on instruments across the galaxy. The battle had begun, and the galaxy waited, helpless, watching the light flicker in the dark. For 3 days, the galaxy watched the sky burn. The energy discharges from the battle were so powerful that they disrupted sensor arrays across the Milky Way. Gravitational waves rippled outward like the aftershocks of an earthquake, strong enough to shift the orbits of asteroids in distant systems. The light from the explosions, even from an impossible distance, was visible to the naked eye on worlds more the galactic rim, a flickering glow on the horizon, like a storm in a place where storms should not exist. No one could see what was happening. The battle was too far away, too vast, too violent for any instrument to give a clear picture. All anyone could do was watch the readings and try to guess what they meant. On the Nexus, Selenith stood in the command center for all 3 days. She did not sit down. She did not sleep. Aides brought her food that she did not touch, and water that she drank without tasting. She watched the sensor data scroll across the screens, and said nothing. On the Torvan Dreadnought, General Drekmo did the same. He stood on his bridge like a statue, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the distant glow that lit up the edge of the galaxy. His crew worked in silence around him. No one spoke unless they had to. There was nothing to say. On her small cargo ship, Captain Reshave sat in her cockpit and listened to the static on every channel. Sometimes, through the noise, she caught fragments of human communications, broken words, half-sentences, voices shouting orders that were cut off mid-word. She could not make sense of any of it. But she kept listening, because it was the only thing she could do. Ambassador Tyan Vor sat in his quarters and wrote. He did not know why. He wrote about everything he had seen, everything he had learned, everything he felt. He wrote about the silence, and the wall, and the fleet, and the star chart. He wrote about Admiral Marin's voice. He wrote as if he were leaving a record for someone who might need to understand what had happened here, in case no one survived to tell the story in person. On the 3rd day, the light stopped. The sensors went quiet. The gravitational waves faded. The static cleared. And then, nothing. Just the normal, cold silence of space. For 6 hours, no one knew what had happened. The Concorde's instruments searched the void for any sign of the arrival, any sign of the human fleet, any sign of anything at all. The data was confused and contradictory. Some readings suggested massive destruction. Others showed nothing at all, as if the entire battle had been erased from existence. Then the first human ship appeared. It came through the edge of the galaxy alone, a cruiser, battered and broken, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from a dozen holes in its hull. It was barely holding together. Its engines flickered like a dying candle, but it was moving, and it was heading home. Behind it came another, and another, and then dozens, then hundreds. The human fleet limped back into the galaxy in a long, ragged line of damaged ships. Some were missing entire sections. Some were being towed by others. Some were little more than wrecks that had somehow held together long enough to make the journey back. The Concorde sensors counted them as they came in. Of the more than 40,000 ships that had gone out to face the arrival, fewer than 12,000 returned. But the arrival was gone. The sensors confirmed it again and again. The entity that had been heading for the galaxy, that ancient, star-eating, impossible thing, was destroyed, broken into clouds of dead matter that drifted harmlessly in the void between galaxies. Whatever it had been, it was nothing now, just dust and memory. The reports came in slowly over the following hours, painting a picture of the cost. Entire colony worlds near the galactic rim had been converted into weapon platforms, their populations evacuated, their surfaces stripped down and rebuilt into massive guns that had fired once and burned themselves out. 17 human worlds had been sacrificed this way. Their names were already being recorded in human records as honored dead. And Earth itself had done something that no one had thought possible. Deep beneath the surface, The humans had built a planetary defense system that no intelligence service in the galaxy had ever detected. In the final hours of the battle, when the arrival had come close enough to threaten the galaxy itself, Earth had fired a directed energy weapon of such power that it had temporarily dimmed the sun. The weapon had struck the arrival at its core and cracked it open like an egg. The sun was already recovering. Scientists estimated it would return to full brightness within a few weeks, but for now, Earth orbited a slightly dimmer star, a scar that would remind the solar system of what had happened for years to come. The human fleet did not celebrate. There were no victory broadcasts, no parades, no triumphant announcements. The ships came home, docked at whatever station could hold them, and went silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It was not the silence of preparation. It was the silence of exhaustion, of grief. 1 week after the battle, a single human shuttle detached from the battered remains of a carrier and set course for the Nexus. Tynel was in the Concorde chamber when it arrived. He had returned to the station with the rest of the reconnaissance fleet, and he had spent the days since then in a daze, attending meetings he barely heard and eating meals he barely tasted. The chamber was full. Every species that had a representative on the Nexus was present. Word had spread that the humans were finally coming back. The doors opened, and Admiral Priya Marin walked in. She looked 10 years older than the last time Tynel had seen her. Her face was thin and drawn. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her left arm was in a sling, and she moved with the careful, stiff gait of someone who was injured in places that did not show. She was wearing a military uniform that was wrinkled and stained, as if she had not changed clothes in days. She walked down the aisle between the rows of silent delegates. Her boots echoed on the polished floor. She reached the human section, looked at the empty chairs where her delegation used to sit, and lowered herself into her seat with a wince. Then she looked up at the chamber, and the ghost of a smile crossed her exhausted face. "Sorry we are late," she said. "What did we miss?" For a moment, the chamber was absolutely still. And then, like a wave breaking against a shore, the room erupted. Every delegate stood. Every species, every representative, every aide and observer and translator in the chamber rose to their feet and began to applaud. The sound was deafening. Hands and claws and tentacles and things that had no human name, all striking together in a wall of noise that shook the walls. The Torvan stomped their feet. The Selari sang. The Vreth clicked their mandibles in their species' highest expression of honor. Tynel stood with the rest of them. He was weeping, and he did not care who saw. He watched Marin sitting in her chair, looking slightly embarrassed by the attention, and he thought that he had never seen anything so brave and so tired and so completely human in his entire life. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed. 47 species sent ships, resources, and workers to help rebuild human space. The Torvan dispatched their entire construction fleet to Earth, the same fleet that built their war stations, and General Drekt Mo personally oversaw the effort. When asked by reporters why the Torvan, a proud warrior species, were acting as builders for the humans, Drekt said simply, "Because they stood in front of us when the darkness came." A warrior repays his debts. The Concorde passed the Marin Doctrine, a formal recognition of humanity as the galaxy's sentinel species. The title came with a permanent seat at the head of the council, priority access to resources, and a commitment from every member species to support human defense capabilities. It was the first time in Concorde history that such a title had been created. But the moment that Tynel would remember for the rest of his life came later, in a quieter place. Humanity built a memorial in the void, at the exact coordinates where the battle had taken place. They constructed a massive structure, a pillar of white metal and light that floated in the empty dark between galaxies. On its surface, in letters that glowed softly against the black, were the names of every ship that had been lost, every crew member who had died, every colony that had been sacrificed. Millions of names, covering every inch of the pillar, a monument to the price that had been paid. Tynell traveled there with Admiral Marin. They stood together on the observation deck of a transport ship, looking at the memorial through the viewport. The names glowed in the dark like stars. Around the pillar, the debris of the battle drifted silently. Twisted metal, shattered hulls, the remains of ships that would never go home. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Tynell asked the question that had been burning inside him since the day the silence began. "Why did you not tell us? We could have helped. We could have fought beside you." Marin did not look at him. She stared at the names on the pillar, and her expression was the expression of someone who was carrying a weight that would never fully be set down. "Because if we failed," she said quietly, "we wanted you to have enough time to run. And if we succeeded, then you never needed to be afraid at all." Tynell looked at her. He looked at the memorial. He looked at the millions of names glowing in the void. And he understood. He had spent 40 years studying humans. He had watched them laugh and fight and build and destroy. He had analyzed their politics, their culture, their strange and contradictory nature. He had written papers and given lectures and thought he understood what made them different from every other species in the galaxy. But it was not until that moment, standing in the dark between galaxies, with a tired woman who had saved every living thing in the Milky Way and asked for nothing in return, that he finally understood the truth. The most terrifying thing about humanity was never their weapons. It was never their ships. It was never their numbers or their technology or their impossible reckless courage. It was that they would rather die in the dark, alone and unmourned, than let a single light in the galaxy go out. The memorial glowed in the void. The names of the dead shone softly against the black, and the galaxy, full of life and noise, and all the messy, beautiful chaos of 1,000 civilizations, burned on. Because someone had stood at the gate, and the gate had held.